In the last lecture, we saw that sea level rose by around 125 meters during the last 20,000 years. Okay? And this is from proxy data of sea level rise. This is global mean, and we also saw that the sea level rise was not uniform. It rose quite slowly in the beginning and then very rapidly and then again slowly. So, this is a very important information. The question is, can we predict the sea level rise that occurred in the past 20,000 years by using climate models? And if the models can predict this sea level rise, both the abrupt change and the gradual change, then we can be confident that we are in a position to predict what will happen in the future on account of global warming. Now, you must know something about how this proxy data was obtained. Okay? One other way to get proxy data is to go to polar regions where there is a lot of ice sheets we saw 1 or 2 kilometers thick, and drill through them like you drill for a bore well, get a thick layer of ice and study the ice layer carefully and see whether they can infer what changes were occurring in the past. One of the famous drilling projects is the Greenland ice core drilling project, where people went to Greenland and drilled for the ice. Okay? And then the other famous one is the drilling of ice core in Lake Vostok in Antarctica. Okay? It has almost 4 kilometers thick ice layer in Lake Vostok, and so this gave us the longest sequence of climate change in the past. This was an amazing contribution by an international team of scientists. This is such a challenging task to go to that remote place in Antarctica and drill all the way to 4 kilometers, take the ice core out and carefully bring it to the laboratory and study how the ice deposition varied in time, and there is air trapped in the ice, and to understand how the composition of the atmosphere at that time varied in terms of amount of carbon dioxide and methane. Okay? So, this was one of the most important achievement in proxy data, to be able to get a long ice core to infer the climate of the past. Okay? Here is an example of various other ice cores. People have gone all over the world. They have gone to Kilimanjaro, they have gone to various parts of Himalayas and got many ice cores. Of course, Antarctica has many ice cores, Greenland of course, and then Canada and South America. So, this has been a very adventurous effort by scientists from all over the world to get as much information about from the ice cores. Remember that these ice sheets and glaciers are melting rapidly. So, people have to do this very quickly, because these many of these ice cores will disappear in the next 100-200 years. And we have another example of map showing various ice cores, and the most important of course is Vostok in Antarctica and the Dome Sea, which we will talk about, and various other locations in the world. So, data from all these ice cores as well as ocean cores were all combined, because one ice core gives you data only over one location. That is a local climate, that is not the global climate. If you want to get global climate change, you need to take data from all these locations and average over all of them. So, the ice cores give you data only over land. You need data over ocean. For that, you need ocean cores, ocean sediments. You have to go with ships, drill deep into the ocean sediments, bring out the core. So, this is a very challenging engineering and scientific challenge, but the scientists all over the world have taken up this challenge, and they got hundreds of ocean cores and ice cores, and they are collected and kept in the laboratory, in special laboratories which are kept very cold. And then these ice and ocean core were studied in great depth, and the composition of those cores were studied very carefully, and from there we were able to infer the temperature and rainfall that occurred in the past in these regions. Okay. Here is a picture of the ice core taken out, and that ice core is carefully wrapped in insulation, and this is from the British Antarctic Survey. And so this is taken out to the lab, and in the lab these ice cores are cut into small pieces, thin layers. Each layer represents a couple of years of deposition of the ice. So based on the isotopic composition of the ice in that layer, one can infer the temperature that was there at the time when the ice was deposited. Okay. And then this, in the lab, people carefully examining this ice core, and then you see various layers. If you are lucky and if the rate of deposition of the ice is very rapid, you will see separate layers for each year. You can identify each of the here 11 annual layers. Okay. So it becomes easy to date the layers, find out in what year that ice was deposited. But suppose the rate of deposition was not that rapid and you don't get a clear annual layers, then you have to depend on other techniques of finding the date of the deposition. One of them is the well known radioactive decay. All of you know that if this layer contains uranium or some other radioactive species, it will decay over time. So based on the amount of uranium or some other radioactive isotope that is there, looking at the abundance, we can infer how far back this ice was deposited. Okay. So this has been a technique which has developed over the last 80 years and has been extremely useful to date the deposition of either ocean or ice based on the how much of the radioactive species remaining today compared to the time when it was deposited. Here is a close up of an ice core which shows the bubbles. These bubbles are very useful because this bubble contains air that was there at that time. That ice has essentially sealed that bubble completely. So the composition of the air in that bubble represent what was the composition of atmosphere at the time when this ice was deposited. This is a remarkable achievement, and all of you must really appreciate the kind of effort that was required to get accurate data on the composition of the atmosphere 10-20,000 years ago, composition like amount of carbon dioxide and methane in parts per million and parts per billion. I want you to appreciate the complexity of this. You take the ice core to the lab and use a hypodermic needle to inject and take that air sample out without contaminating that sample with the air in the laboratory. It's not easy at all. Okay, it's a very, very tough technique, and it has been mastered, and people have spent hours getting this sample out and measuring very accurately the composition of air at that time, mainly methane and carbon dioxide. Here is a picture showing how snow which falls on these polar regions slowly become ice, and ice get compressed on the top, and at a depth of 50 meters this air bubble is trapped. Okay. So, you can infer the composition of this air bubble not near the surface. Surface air is continuously in contact with the ambient atmosphere, but the air deep below 50 meters and below, air is sealed in ice. Okay. That is the air we want. Air is sealed by ice naturally, and which contains information about the past climate. Now, one of the most important ways to infer temperature in the past is to look at the composition of two different isotopes of oxygen in the ice. Okay. Now, oxygen contains many isotopes, but the one we will focus mainly on is O16 and O18. Okay. So, O18 is a heavier isotope, O16 is a lighter isotope. The abundance of O18 is very small, 0.2%, okay, 1 by 500 of O16. So, the small amount of O18, which is 0.2%, you need to measure that part very accurately to find out what could be the temperature of the earth at that time. Now, you must remember that the water containing O18 will be heavier than water containing O16. Okay. So, when water from the ocean evaporates, all of you can understand that H216O will evaporate more rapidly than H218O, because H218O is heavier, so it cannot evaporate that easily. So, as the water evaporates from the ocean, the composition of water vapor in the atmosphere will not be same as that in the ocean. And as the air moves in the atmosphere and the water vapor condenses, again more H2O18 will condense than O16 because it is heavier. Okay. So, as this water vapor travels from the oceans to the polar regions, all of you must realize by the time you go to the poles, the relative amount of O16 and O18 in the water in the poles will be very different from that in the ocean, because by the time the water vapor condenses over the polar region, there are two occasions where the change occurs. When there is evaporation, there is a differential evaporation. Then when there is condensation over the polar region, again O18 will condense, water vapor containing O18 will condense more readily than O16. Okay. The final point is that the amount of O18 in the polar region water will be less than that over oceans. Okay. Now, why is this important? It is important because as we go into the glacial age and a lot of water from the ocean has appeared over the polar regions as ice, the relative amount of O18, O16 over the polar ice versus the ocean gives an idea of how much water vapor has gone into the polar region. So, the relative amount of O18 and O16 in the ice core is a direct measure of the amount of water which has been transported from the ocean to the polar regions. Okay. So, this is just another slide showing you the difference between H2O18 and H2O16, and then we measure the amount of O18, which is very small amount, by something called delta O18, which is the amount of O18 in the sample related to O16 minus a standard provided by a standard agency. So, it tells you the departure of the amount of O18 in your ice sample compared to some standard. Everybody uses the same standard, so we have a good way to compare. And this is multiplied by 1000 because the number is very small, and this is called per mil. Instead of per cent, which is per 100, per mil is per 1000. Okay, that's all. So, we will see lots of now graphs showing delta O18, which shows the amount of O18 in the sample per 1000. Okay. Now, the key point is that as ice sheets grow, water removed from the ocean has a lower O18 than the water that remains. Okay. And thus the delta O18 value of the sea water in the global ocean is linearly correlated with ice volume that is there. So, there is a direct connection between delta O18 in the ice core layer and the amount of ice volume at that time. So, this is a very important result which is very relevant. Okay. A time series of global ocean O18 is equivalent to a time series of ice volume. Okay. As the amount of O18 goes on increasing in the ocean, you know that more and more water vapor has been deposited in the polar region and they appear as ice. Remember that there is not much water vapor stored over land, okay, except in a few lakes. Okay. It is the polar regions which store water for long periods. Remember that. Now, you can also correlate the delta O18 with temperature. So, here is a graph showing the mean annual temperature at various latitudes on earth and the delta O18 in the rainfall that occurred in those regions. So, when rainfall occurs, people collect that sample, measure delta O18, that is the y axis, and the x axis is the annual mean temperature of that region. This shows there is a linear relationship. Okay. So, this is also a useful thing, that the delta O18 value also gives an idea of the local temperature, but this is not as accurate as our estimate of ice volume. Ice volume is a perfect measure from delta O18, but this is an indirect measure which is used. So, this also will be useful. Now, let us look at, based on these samples, how did the temperature of the earth, global mean, based on average over all ice core, ocean sediments, other proxies all combined, how did it change from 20,000 years ago to today? Today is right here, 2009. There is a projection to future that we will not talk about now. Now, you see that compared to the present climate, the global mean temperature was about 5 degrees lower. Okay. That is a very good information we have, that the last ice age was only about 5 degrees colder than today. But notice that 5 degrees colder global mean temperature resulted in so much of ice over America, Canada and Europe. Okay. So, 5 degrees does not look large to many of us, because in any given place that we stay, the difference between summer and winter is more than 5 degrees, right. So, we think 5 degrees is not much. 5 degrees in global mean is very important. 5 degrees in global mean is a huge change. Okay. So, you should not get confused between 5 degree change in local temperature in any given location and 5 degree change in global temperature. Global temperature represents the average of all the regions of the world, and that change is very large. Okay. This 5 degree change in global mean actually means much larger change in certain latitudes. Okay. So, I will show that very soon. Here is another example of Greenland, where a lot of ice cores were taken. This is not global mean, but Greenland temperature. Greenland temperature varied a lot over the last 20,000 years. It was minus 45 degrees centigrade in the last ice age, then showed some rapid fluctuation, sudden warming by about 15 degrees locally, not globally. Then it again cooled back to minus 50, then again rose. These are abrupt changes. These are very important to understand, because these abrupt changes tell you that Earth's climate is not stable. Earth's climate can change suddenly, okay, locally. These are local changes in Greenland. Then it warmed up, and around 10,000 years ago it reached around minus 30 and remained constant for the next 10,000 years. So, this is the period I talked about where human being thrived because agriculture was possible, because temperature was fairly constant, and as agriculture prospered and human beings were able to grow more food, their population exploded. So, human population was less than 1 million 20,000 years ago. Today it is 8,000 million. Okay. So, you must understand how climate has played such a fundamental role in the growth of human civilization. Okay. Now, we human beings are altering Earth's climate, and climate is becoming very warm suddenly, and so it might suddenly cause a major crisis and result in sudden decline in human population. It can happen because we have been used to a very stable climate between 10,000 years ago and 1850. Okay. After 1850, the Earth has started warming rapidly, and the consequence of that we have not fully understood. So, that is why we need to examine this period very carefully, so that we can use this period to tune our climate models and try to predict how climate will vary in the next 100 to 200 years. Okay. Here is a close up of the last 10,000 years, construction from various proxies. I want you to realize that various proxies do not give the same answer. There is a difference of, in the global mean temperature, there is a difference of 0.25 degrees. Okay. That is not surprising, because every proxy has its problems and error bars. So, you can see that two different proxies say that 10,000 years ago, one proxy says 10,000 years ago Earth was only 0.1 degree warmer than present, or 1850 rather. Compared to 1850, this is only 0.1 degree warmer, but the other proxy says it is 0.4 degree warmer. Now, that is a big issue. Now, many more data is required now to find out which proxy is more reliable. Even this proxy, which is reported in this study, has an error bar of around 0.1 degree. So, remember that global mean temperature cannot be measured very accurately. There is an error of around 0.1 degree, because proxies are not perfect. Proxies have problems. Proxies have problems in converting whatever data we get, tree ring or something else, to temperature. And secondly, there is a problem in the dating the proxy, finding out at what date this proxy was deposited. It is a tree ring or an ice core or something else. It was created at some time. That date is not known precisely, because there is an error in the dating of the order of 100, 200 years easily. Here is another example of data, okay, and you can see that this is the past data for Marquardt et al., and the red is the data of the last 150 years based on thermometers. Now, what we see is that around 9,000 years ago, the global mean temperature was around 0.3 Kelvin below 1850. Then it rose by around 0.5 degrees, then remained constant for about 4,000 years, then gradually cooled. Okay? And by 1850 it reached a value comparable to 9,000 years ago, then suddenly started rising. Okay? The sudden rise as obtained from proxy agrees with temperature data. So, this shows the proxies are quite good for global mean temperature, because in the last couple hundred years we have both proxy data and temperature data, and they are showing the same rapid rise that we have seen the last 150 years. So, you must realize that the hard work put in by scientists all over the world to gather proxy data has been successful. They are able to tell us the global mean temperature with an accuracy of around plus or minus 0.1 degree. We can do better than that, but this is quite good, accuracy of 0.1. Now, one more example of the proxy data of the last 2,000 years, where historical data is also there from our ancestors who wrote about the past. And again, you can see that this proxy data also correctly reproduces the sudden warming of the last 150 years. Okay? So, based on this, all of you must be convinced that we can use proxy data as a good reference point to tune our models. Okay? As you know, climate models have various assumption approximations. So, when you run the model, you have some parameters which you do not know accurately. So, these model parameters are adjusted such that they agree with this proxy data. Okay? That is why proxy data is very, very useful. Now, let us look at a close up of the last 15,000 years. You can see that here we see the temperature of Greenland, and on the right the accumulation of ice in Greenland, snow in Greenland. Red is the snow accumulation, green is the temperature. You can see that Greenland underwent a lot of rapid changes. Okay? There were warm periods and there were cold periods. Okay? And from the cold period there is a sudden change to warm periods. So, what this tells us is rapid climate change is possible locally. In a place like Greenland or maybe in India or in Africa or in America, climate can change rapidly, can change by here for example by almost 10 degrees in about 1,000 years. That is possible. Okay? So, this should not be coming as a surprise. So, such changes occurred in the past, such changes can occur in the future. Here you are seeing sudden increase in snowfall as the temperature went up. What you must remember is the amount of snow that can fall in higher latitudes depends on temperature. Because temperature is very low, atmosphere has very little water vapor, so it cannot condense much snow. So, for a lot of snowfall to occur, you need a higher temperature. Of course, it has to be below 0, but it cannot be well below 0. If it is minus 60, the snowfall is very low. If it is minus 40, snowfall is high. Okay? At minus 60, according to this data, it hardly accumulates 5 centimeters of ice, but at minus 40, it is 25 centimeters. So, 5 times increase because of increase in temperature and hence humidity. So, this is a very important point you must remember. Okay? Now, again a close up showing how the change in temperature in Greenland caused a change in amount of methane. So, amount of methane that is there in the atmosphere is closely coupled to temperature. Because at high temperature there are areas where plants growing in water like rice plants, they generate methane. Okay? And there is permafrost, that is frozen soil in mid latitudes. As the temperature rises, the methane trapped in the permafrost comes out. It is already happening now in Siberia. So, this happened in the past also. Okay? So, the fact that methane and temperature are going together gives you confidence that both the measurement of methane and temperature was accurate in the past. So, these are all various reasons why we have confidence in our paleo data. Okay? So, paleo data measurement is very tough. It requires a lot of hard work in the field and in the lab, and there are various errors in gathering the information and measuring it. So, we need reassurance that this data is accurate, and this is done by comparing measurement of methane in the air trapped in the ice core with temperature in that ice core, and this results show that they are quite good. Okay. Here is another sample again from Greenland, and for a longer period, the last 70,000 years, again showing that the rate of accumulation of snow was quite high in the recent past compared to the last ice age. And again you can see a correlation between ice accumulation and temperature, which we saw earlier. And this again shows the same thing, and this highlights the abrupt changes that occur in the climate in Greenland, and some of them are given names like Younger Dryas cold period and Boiling Aleroid warm period. This is named after the people who discovered these, and so these are very important sudden climate change events which are related to the meltwater pulse that I talked about when I showed the sea level rise. These are very, very important data which will enable us to understand how the earth climate changed in the past. Okay. So, this lecture now will continue in the next lecture, and we will try to understand from this data how the temperature changed during the last 20,000 years. Thank you.